Our first creepy tale comes from one of our subscribers, Christiana from Romania, who wrote that a friend of the family was grieving the recent death of a beloved daughter. The daughter was fit and healthy, but heartbroken because her fiancé had to go away to war. The daughter hadn't heard from her fiancé in a while, and one night she was found dead in her bed holding his photograph. After the subsequent funeral, she appeared to her mother in a dream, asking that she buy her a wedding dress. She was to keep it in the box as it came in, and then at midnight drive to the first crossroads she found, and was to wait. Then she asked her mother to flag down the first vehicle that came to the crossroads, and whoever it was, she was to give them the dress. Because she loved her daughter so much, she did as she was asked. The very next day she bought the dress, and at the stroke of midnight she jumped in a car and drove to the first crossroads, stopped the first car she saw, which turned out to be a military vehicle from a local military base. The vehicle stopped and a soldier got out and asked the woman if she needed assistance. The mother told him the dream and that she was to give the dress to the first vehicle she saw. The soldier, understandably, squinted his eyes and shook his head in disbelief. He said they couldn't take the dress from her as they were on a mission to take dead bodies of young men who had died in the war back home. The soldier then went on to explain that had just one man left in the vehicle. The mother said again that her daughter died suddenly and was holding the photo of her beloved. She showed it to the soldier. The soldier looked at it. The other soldier that was with him had by then walked over and heard the end of the story. He looked at the woman and she could see he was very sympathetic. The mother told him the name, and then the second soldier nodded and took the dress. He said this was the name of the last man they were taking home to be buried. He also said he would let the family know of the daughter's wish for him to be buried with the dress that was in the box. The mother smiled and with tears in her eyes got back in her car and watched as the soldiers drove away. Pretty creepy, eh? Thanks, Christiana, that was a great story, enough to make the hair stand up on the back of your neck. Our next creepy story has been sent to us from El Paso, Texas, from a viewer named Lizzie. This one's called Ghost on Highway 85. There is a road that runs alongside the Rio Grande on the El Paso side of the Mexican border. US Route 85 is a 1,500-mile long north-south highway that travels in the mountains and northern plains of the United States. The terminus of the highway is at the Mexican border in El Paso, Texas, connecting with Mexican Federal Highway 45, also known as the Can-Am Highway. This happened in the early 1990s, way before mobile phones or satellite navigation on that short bit of highway. I was travelling north with Franja del Rio on my left-hand side and the University of El Paso on a ridge on my right. In the day it was a road bathed in the brightness of the West Texas sky. Although it was a bit worn and often in need of repair, it was safe enough. The border highway patrolman could often be seen in the distance on a dirt path watching illegal immigrant activity. However, at night, everything was different. The road plummeted into darkness. The lighting was poor in that area. However, because the I-10 West travelled nearly parallel to Highway 85, most of the traffic went that way up and out to the west side of El Paso. It was a very cold early December night and I wanted to do some Christmas shopping. I was travelling at night and wanted to avoid the late rush traffic on the I-10 since I had a limited amount of time before I had to get back to work. The only light came from the dashboard odometer of my little old truck. My radio was broken, so I took to singing to myself as I rambled down the bumpy road. I wasn't really paying attention to the road, to be honest. There were no other cars on the road, which I found odd, but I kind of just shrugged it off. The only thing I was fearful of was if there was a hidden cop on that stretch of road, so I made sure I stayed to the speed limit, which was 55 miles per hour. As I drove along, I noticed a figure in my headlights walking on the median, on the passenger side, the right side. It looked like a woman with a long white top and black wet hair. I really couldn't make out her face, as she was a bit of a blur as I went past. I remember thinking how odd it was to see a woman walking alone without a coat and wet through. Then, a few hundred yards down the road, I saw her again. My heart began to beat out of my chest and my mouth went dry. Instinctively, I turned the rearview mirror up because I became scared to look back, fearful of what I may see. I was more afraid of what I had seen or what I thought I had seen than a speeding ticket. I slammed my foot down and decided to quickly exit as soon as I could. Shopping would have to wait for another day. How could I have passed the same woman twice? It wasn't until later that I learned the road was dangerous at night. Lone motorists were often targeted by gangs who threw rocks or shot at tyres to rob and sometimes kill motorists. Sometimes motorists were flagged down and carjacked or made to drive to parts unknown. Women had an even bigger threat. Could that have been a ghost warning me of a peril had I continued on that road? Or was this the spectre of a person who had been killed on this stretch of road? I'd never know. I never used that road ever again. This one's called The Lawman. Martin had loved going to his grandmother's house and went over to her house a lot. He never met his grandfather, who passed away in an accident before he was born. No one ever talked about him, and his family said his grandmother would become sad if they ever brought him up. As much as he loved seeing his grandmother, he was afraid of one upstairs room in the house, but he never understood why. One night he went to his grandmother's and saw that the door was wide open but no one was in. He could hear crying and it was coming from inside the room. He was afraid to go into it. He shouted to his grandmother, but there was no answer. Dreading what he would see inside, he opened the door. The crying stopped, and on closer inspection he could see there was no one in the room. Martin decided he must have heard a cat outside or something on the window ledge. He closed the door and went walking around the house to look for his grandmother, checking that everything was in order. The house was empty with no sign of anything going on, and so he decided that his grandmother must have left the house in a hurry without locking the door, and maybe she didn't actually close it quite properly. He had a key, so he closed and locked the door and began to walk away. He turned around to look at the house and noticed a man in what appeared to be a policeman's uniform looking out of the window of the house. Martin began to look around, but no one was around. He looked back up at the window and there was no one there. He realised that the window was the room he didn't like to go into. This really unnerved him so much, as he hadn't seen anyone in the house and he still wasn't sure where his grandmother was. Now, this was in the days before mobile phones. He was beginning to really worry, so he went to a nearby phone box and rang his mother, then his aunts, and then an uncle, asking if anyone knew where his grandmother was. No one knew, and they all became worried. He remembered seeing the policeman in the window and rang the police department, asking if anyone had been called to his grandmother's address. The police looked up the address and they said earlier they had found a lady collapsed. They took her to hospital and found a utility bill with his grandmother's address on it in her handbag, but it had a man's name on it, so she was still unidentified. Martin went to the hospital and it was indeed his grandmother. He got to hospital staff to call the rest of the family and they all came to be with her. The family asked him what had happened, so he told them the story. He confided to his grand aunt about the lawman he saw in the window. She then recounted the story of how many years ago his grandmother had been married to a very bad man. His grandmother had been afraid of him, as he was often quite violent with her. She had a friend she had known since her school days, a man who later became a police officer, who begged her to leave him. It was a complicated relationship. One night there had been a fight between both the men in one of the bedrooms, which ended up with both men dead. Apparently the lawman was actually his grandfather, and the grand aunt thinks he was meant to find his grandmother to ensure all her family were with her by her side when she passed away, so that she could be surrounded by love. Fabulous story that, fabulous. Thanks Martin. Our next creepy tale has been sent in by a subscriber, Angelie, who says, "This isn't a ghost story as such, but more a weird set of coincidences. I was meant to go to a rave. I wasn't sure exactly where it was, but I knew it was in a very isolated place, but felt it would be okay as I was going with two friends, a couple that I knew, in their car. I went to the local shop to use the cash machine so I could give them some petrol money towards the road trip. As I was coming out of the store, two people I had never seen on my street were arguing outside. I remember one said to the other, 'Don't even go there.' And the other one just shouted back at them saying, 'No, you don't go there.' I walked away from them and went a couple of doors down to my house. I turned on an old radio that used to be my dad's. He'd passed away a long time ago and I love vintage things, so I kept it. When I turned it on, Simple Minds was coming through the speaker with the song 'Don't You Forget About Me.' I went to take a shower and could hear the music playing. When I got out, the song on the radio was Casey and the Sunshine Band, 'Please Don't Go.' Then suddenly the phone rang, so I turned down the radio and answered it. it was the wrong number. The lady on the phone wanted to make sure she had the number right and started to repeat it back to me to confirm she had dialed correctly. As she began to read, she was interrupted by someone on her end, and she said to them, "Wait a minute, I'm talking on the phone, don't go." She apologised to me and reread the number. I told her she had the right number, but it wasn't for the person she wanted. Then she hung up without saying anything. I changed the radio station and heard the song "Baby Please Don't Go" by Van Morrison playing. Something inside kept alerting me to the word "don't" for some reason. I just couldn't get it out of my head. So I rang my friend and said I'd changed my mind and that I was just going to stay in for the night. I told them I just felt off about it. They'd also decided not to go, so I just spent the evening watching TV and went to bed early. The next day I heard from the friends who I was meant to be going with. They told me that they were glad they didn't go after all, because they found out that the party had been a really bad night, with people fighting, a fire broke out, and someone had passed away from taking a substance that people were passing around. I think had we gone to the rave, we may have come to some harm, if not for all the coincidences with the word "don't" in it. Wow, very strange indeed, Angeli. Thanks for sharing that story with us.
I hope you enjoyed all those, folks. And remember, like, comment, share and subscribe.